She's gained about 2.5 million subscribers with over 1 billion views, sharing what seemed like the perfect, wholesome family life. But behind the scenes, something far more troubling was unfolding, leading to a shocking case that would capture public attention and raise questions about the dark side of social media fame. The 8 Passengers channel started in 2015 and quickly gained popularity for its portrayal of everyday family life. Ruby often shared parenting tips and moments from her family's routine. Her content resonated with many viewers, particularly with other parents who admired her organization and approach to raising a child. However, as the years went by, the truth began to show. The Franke's family life took a dark turn when allegations of abuse and neglect surfaced, and Ruby and Kevin met Jody Hildebrandt, who was a counselor and relationship coach. Chad had described his mom as originally making fun and loving content to becoming more of a religious leader in her content making. She had believed that God intended her children to be raised these ways, and so she was doing the right thing by being strict with them. During one of their YouTube videos, Ruby was talking about removing bedroom privileges, specifically for Chad, who was her oldest son. He was 15 at the time, and he had just got his bedroom back after 7 months. He had been living in the basement and sleeping on only a beanbag. Another instance was Ruby's youngest daughter, who was 6 years old, was sent to school without a lunch because Ruby had believed that she was old enough to be responsible and prepare her own lunch on her own. So not only did the 6-year-old have to make her lunch, but she had to remember to pack it as well. The school one day had contacted Ruby about her daughter missing her lunch, and Ruby refused to bring a lunch to school for her daughter. Other punishments were sending a child to a wilderness camp for troubled teens, threatening her daughter to behead her stuffed animal, and telling 2 of her children that they weren't getting any gifts from Santa that year because they weren't responding well to the other punishments. And so the kids that year, the 2 of them had to watch their siblings open gifts in front of them. During this time as well, Ruby had gotten closer to Jody, Jody was described as preying on the weak. Jody knew how to hit certain pain points for people in order to turn that into a profit. Jody was really good at exploiting Mormon anxiety as well. And Jody had become the savior for many of those individuals, and so they started to look for forgiveness within Jody and not with God themselves. So Ruby had convinced Kevin, her husband, to join Jody's men's group to help their marriage. Originally, during the men's group, Jody had praised Kevin, so he really actually enjoyed the men's groups at first. But later down the line, that takes a turn, and we'll get into that in the future. But Jody had allowed Ruby to train as a coach, and so Ruby and Franke had ended up growing really quickly within Connections. Connections was Jody's company. They became the face and the voice of Connections, and Jody loved to have their influence in audience as well because it kind of boosted her company. Jody would treat others differently based on status and money, so since Ruby and Kevin had a lot of status and influence, she really attached business. They even created a Moms of Truth group on Facebook where Ruby had invited friends in the neighborhood to join. Ruby and Jody had started teaching parenting classes together on there. Ruby believed that she needed to stop vlogging to save her kids because her kids were being hurt with entitlement. Ruby believed she was a part of God's work and needed to shift the world. So during this time, COVID had happened, so COVID outbroke, and this was really when it started to affect their family. So they had COVID, there was a huge earthquake, and the family actually started to get a little bit excited. They had believed that the world was ending and there was a second coming. The Book of Mormon described the second coming, so they believed that everyone else who didn't believe in the Book of Mormon was going to burn and Christ was going to come, and since they were on the right side of things and they were Mormon, that they were going to be fine. They had also been preparing for this day. Anyways, they started stocking the shelves in Jody's home with food and resources, so they really felt prepared for the second coming. Ruby believed that Jody had been called by God, and the two of them would combine together to share God's truth with the world. So then, later on, Jody one day had called Ruby. This is in May of 2021 now. And she was weeping on the phone, saying that she was being haunted by hooded, shadowed figures that would appear surrounding her bed at night. And she said that Satan had it out for her. So Ruby and Kevin believed it. And while they went to her house originally to go check things out, Kevin had said that while they were at Jody's house, there were super weird things that would happen. So on one instance, a huge crash happened in the basement, but there was nothing in the basement. So they were like, okay, this is like super creepy and weird. And then another thing, there was a huge handprint almost on a window or a door, a sliding door or something. And they believed that there was a presence of Satan around Jody's house. So Ruby then suggested that Jody just stay at their house to heal, and from that point on, Jody had lived with them. Ruby started feeling like her kids were lashing out afterwards once Jody had moved in, and the kids were being rude and just not listening, and she felt that her kids were evil, like genuinely evil. Kevin even said that after Jody had moved in, weird things just started happening around the house. Jody would go into possessed trances. She would be mumbling and groaning weird things, like weird sayings too. And Ruby had believed that they needed to help her overcome this thing by casting out the evil spirits. So Kevin said that every time they would go up there together and try to cast out the evil spirits, they would say Jesus' name, and even just by saying that, it would seem like Jody was super physically hurt. When she would hear the name, she would thrust, she would like groan, she would growl, she would do all this weird stuff, almost as if she was possessed by the devil. So Kevin's help with all this ended up not working. Nothing was really changing with Jody. So Ruby and Jody decided that it would be best if Kevin just stayed away and they just do it together. So Jody's possessions were the worst at nights, like in the middle of the night. So Ruby ended up deciding that she was just gonna stay in bed with Jody every single night to try to help keep the evil spirits away. I found that really weird. Like, oh, your evil spirits are coming in the middle of the night. Okay, I think that's a little weird, but that's just me. So after, Ruby and Jody start, spending, sleeping together, essentially not literally sleeping together, but sleeping in the same bed together, Kevin had said that during the men's groups with Jody would start to call him out and kind of blame Kevin for everything, just attack in these men groups. Kevin even started noticing Ruby and Jody had seemed to get really close, more than a sisterhood, and Jody started wanting Ruby all to herself. As a backstory, Chad was always told to confess everything to Jody. So Chad was told to just go to Jody and almost confess his sins to her, and especially if he did something around corn. I'm not going to say the actual thing, but corn, okay? And so one day, Chad ended up telling Jody, hey, I've been kissing girls, after school, and I've been watching corn. And Jody was like, well, you need to tell your mom. So he ended up going and telling Ruby, and Ruby was like, oh my gosh, this is the reason why Jody is having all these demonic attacks, is because of you, because you're going behind her back and you're doing all these lustful, horrible things. She was like, you know what, Chad, you need to go. And so she kicked Chad out of the house at 17 years old. This was in 2022, because at that same time, she also kicked Kevin, her husband, out of the house too. She said that Kevin was also being lustful and holding herself and Jody back, and that he needed to leave. They were both told not to talk to Ruby, and they weren't allowed to talk to any of the kids. So none of their siblings, none of the kids for Kevin, nothing. They couldn't talk. They couldn't talk to each other, nothing. They were banned. So Kevin ended up moving into another home, and he just didn't contact anybody. So in 2023, so a year later, arrests were triggered after seeing a distressing doorbell camera footage of a 12-year-old boy not wearing any shoes, who had escaped from Jody's house and rang the neighbor's doorbell. The neighbor opened the door, and he said in quotes, "Hi, I was wondering if you could do 2 favors." So the neighbor's like, well, what are they? He said, taking me to the nearest police station. Actually, just one is fine, meaning 1 favor instead of the 2. So the neighbor immediately called the police, explaining that the boy showed up to his house. He was emaciated, and he had duct tape around his legs. He's also saying he's hungry and he's thirsty. The neighbor, actually started crying while on the phone with police, explaining that the kid was just covered in wounds and looked to be detained. He was literally sobbing because the kid was so horrifically, he looked so horrific. The boy had duct tape around his wrists and ankles. Underneath the duct tape was saran wrap, and when asked by an officer how this happened, the boy said that Jody and his mom tied his arms and his legs with rope and handcuffs, and they tied that to weights to the ground. So basically, the weights were on the ground, rope and handcuffs attached to his arms and legs, so that he couldn't move, he couldn't get up, he couldn't do anything. When the boy told police that 2 of his other siblings may still be in the house, the police immediately went to Jody's house to go search. Jody had opened the door finally after the police had been knocking and ringing the doorbell. And she already had an attorney on the phone. I found that to be weird. I don't know. They didn't really go into explaining that, but I just thought that was weird. So police ended up searching the whole house, and they finally entered a room with a bed in it. It had an attached bathroom and also an attached closet. Nothing was in the room or anything, though. Nothing was in anything. It was empty. But in the middle of the floor, in the closet, I believe it was, they found another child. At first, they had thought it was a little boy, but she wouldn't talk. Police said the child appeared scared, so they ended up contacting the other police officer who was with the boy who had rang the doorbell and asked him if he had a brother. He was like, no, I have a little sister with a shaved head and brown hair, and he hasn't seen her in over a month. worried about Jody and what she would think and where she was. That's kind of all she was saying, like, where's Jody? I'm worried. Like, she was really worried about Jody. So for over 2 hours, police officers were sitting with the little girl, but she really just remained emotionless. They ended up being like, okay, let's buy this little girl a pizza. And so she ended up eating the whole thing. So they ordered her another pizza, and she ate half of that pizza. So she ate 1.5 pieces, 1.5 things of pizza, which is so much. She even ate a shake with it. And that really just showed police officers how hungry this little girl really was. Officers continued looking in the house for a second child that they believed could possibly be in there. They ended up not finding one, but they did come across what appeared to be a safe room in the house. It ended up having a rope and handcuffs. And so after 4 hours of being with the little girl, she finally agreed to leave the closet. At that point, Ruby had ended up showing up to the house, and that was when she was arrested on site. I want to explain also that the little girl was also extremely malnourished, just as a little boy. The little boy was very, very severely malnourished, so he ended up having to get treated for that. The little girl, I think, was not as malnourished, but she also had to get treated for malnourishment. The little boy also had to get treated for deep lacerations from being tied up with rope. The rope, well, underneath, remember the saran wrap and everything, ended up being found out that there was cayenne pepper and honey that was added to his wounds, probably as an extra layer of punishment. Just horrible. It soon became clear that the Franke's public image was a stark contrast to what was happening behind closed doors. Allegations of physical and emotional abuse, as well as neglect, began to surface, pointing to an environment far from the loving family portrayed on their YouTube channel. In August of 2023, Ruby Franke was arrested on charges of aggravated child abuse and neglect, sentenced to up to 30 years in prison. Her arrest shocked the online community, as viewers had watched her family for years, believing in the image they had presented. Kevin Franke was also implicated in the case, but he was not immediately arrested. There had been factual basis that Franke was forcing her son to work outdoors for weeks without any sunscreen or proper clothing, resulting in severe sunburns, sometimes even being tied down in the sun with weights. Other times, he would have to jump on the trampoline all day, and even described having to go in the middle of the desert and being forced to run. Police ended up searching the home a second time after finding out this information, and they found on the nightstand that there was a blue folder. It had everything that Jody had ever done to the children. It was like a day-to-day journal of everything she thinks she's done, everything. She even had claimed that her children were the devil and that her kids were possessed. One passage wrote, "I told the boy he emulates a snake. If he wants to emulate the Savior, he needs to be 100% obedient with exactness." So in the LDS, they believe that no unclean thing can enter the kingdom of God. So her belief of this ended up turning into the abuse of her children. After the arrest, Chad had still believed that Jody and Ruby were chosen by God, and the jail would crumble because these were the last days, and Jody and Ruby would return, with God. Even after a year of not speaking to his father, Chad decided after the arrest of his mom and Jody that he was going to text him. His dad responded saying that he was going to go to the house that evening and they could meet up there if he wanted to. Kevin told him about the children being under the influence of evil spirits and what they had been doing. Chad said he ended up accepting the abuse as being something truthful. He believed that, there were evil spirits, and walking into the house for the first time, he was shocked as everything was a complete mess. Everything was all over the floors. Nothing was in the drawers. Kevin said the things he was believing weren't compatible with the facts that were sitting right in front of him. His neighbor ended up seeing Kevin and coming by, and the neighbor was like, well, yeah, obviously nothing's in the drawers because they were planning on moving. So he ends up being like, oh, what do you mean moving? They end up talking for over 6 hours where Kevin starts asking him all these questions. Kevin ended up realizing that everything was just a lie and he had been brainwashed. He told Chad that they've been lied to this whole time, and no child, none of them were possessed, and nothing his mom, Ruby, was saying was true. Chad said he feels guilty as he was the last line of defense for his children, and he just packed his bags and walked away a year ago. He feels like guilty about that. In court, Ruby ended up reading a letter to her children saying, "To my babies, I can see now how over the past 4 years I was in a deep undercurrent that led us to danger. I was so disoriented that I believed dark was light and right was wrong." Ruby and Jody both pleaded guilty to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse where they will serve up to 30 years in prison. The public's reaction was swift and intense. Fans of the 8 Passengers channel, many of whom had supported the Frankes for years, were horrified by the allegations. Some expressed disbelief, while others criticized the couple for exploiting their children for online fame. The case raised larger concerns about the ethics of family vlogging and the impact it can have on children who are often forced to be a part of content without a say. In Ruby Franke's case, it serves as a tragic reminder of the dangers lurking behind the facade of social media fame, especially when children are involved. As the legal proceedings have unfolded, the questions surrounding the safety and exploitation of children in the digital age remain more relevant than ever. What do you guys think of family vloggers and of this situation? Did you guys watch the 8 Passengers? I personally didn't know of them until this story had came out, but I'd be curious if you were following their vlog channel and if you had noticed any change in them during this time that this was all starting to unfold. But thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of our true crime little series. If anyone has any ideas on any other true crime or kind of stories similar to this, please comment them down below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It would mean the world to me. Thank you guys so much for